Okay, and of course, continuing our theme of threat assessment in the education sector, because as most of you know, the world of threat assessment is divided up in the education context, sort of the terrorism context, workplace violence context, and then I always kind of like to say the other, which is kind of your stalking, domestic violence, etc. And we've always been very fortunate in South Africa that we haven't really had any mass incidents in South Africa in an education context, whether that be kindergarten through to university. The closest we've ever come was a few months ago, where we had a student who went to a primary school. So I think the shooter was about 13 years old, with his father's firearm, shot, thankfully not fatally, the principal. But he had, of course, a list of 3 people that he wanted to shoot, including the principal. And of course, as we see typically in these cases, he had been telling people about this. He had a WhatsApp group where he was communicating his intention. So a lot of the same stuff we see in sort of school shootings across the world, where these things actually are preventable if we have systems in place. And of course, the closest we come before this one earlier this year was 2007, the so-called Krugersdorp school sword attack, where a final year high school student went to school on a Monday, put on a fake Slipknot, that band, mask, and basically took out a fake samurai sword and killed one student and attacked another student, thankfully, who survived, and 2 of the general laborers at the school before he essentially stopped. And again, that had intended to be a mass violence incident. So we've been very lucky, but we cannot just sit back and say, because it's never happened, we don't have to worry about this. It is something that, of course, increasingly organizations are taking very, in South Africa, looking at the concept of active shooters. So that's important to keep in mind. And of course, we often get it from one perspective. And this is really why it's great today to have someone like Aaron. We don't often hear from people who had thought about doing this, or people who had done this for various reasons. And I think there's a theme which is really amazing in the threat assessment associations to have these different voices. And that's kind of where I think, for me, Aaron's talk really kind of fits into that theme. It's not the gory insight. This is not about the gory story of what could have happened. This is about how did a young man get to the point where he felt that this was an option in his life. But of course, more importantly, how did he get away from that point? And those are valuable insights for us, either on the threat assessment point of view or the people managing individuals who indicate some kind of signs of moving down the pathway to committing this type of act. So I'm not going to spend a lot on Aaron's bio because, again, you're signed up here because probably you read it. But the things that really stand out for me, that he's an activist on violence prevention. And again, as I said, how he got to that point and how he moved away from it is really what I think is so important for us threat assessors to hear about. And we had that unique opportunity to hear from this individual's perspective. He's appeared on a lot of US network news channels. A TED Talk where he speaks about this, which saw, I think, over 14 million views. And he speaks on various educational platforms to students about, his viewpoint on these issues. And he also works with law enforcement, such as the FBI, on helping to improve prevention strategies. So I'm going to hand it over to Aaron. He's going to basically talk. It's not a formal academic talk, so there are not going to be slides to hand out. And of course, we'll leave it up towards people at the end to ask any questions that they would like to. But Aaron, thank you so much again for sharing something, of course, that is hugely personal and a story that you've lived. And we really appreciate, like I said, people such as yourselves who are coming to educate us from a completely different perspective that we don't often hear from. So Aaron, thank you very much. It's over to you.
Thank you very much, Gerard. It's a very big an honor for me to be here. Thank you, everybody, for letting me speak to you guys here. If you would please, a couple of you do me a favor, just to make it easier on my end. I know it's weird, but if you would turn your cameras on, it gives me someone to look at while I'm talking, so I'm not just staring at my blank screen. So just as a favor to me, if anybody is able to toss a camera on, that just gives me a face to see. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. So trigger warning about this talk. This is a very sensitive and personal topic that I talk about, and it's going to talk about abuse and some really graphic details. So if anybody has any issues with that, feel free to log off. I won't be insulted at all. Go ahead, take your personal time. This can get really intense. But thank you guys. My name is Aaron Stark, and I was almost a school shooter. So when my earliest memory of my entire life, the 0 point of my existence, the spot where I start my whole world, I'm laying on my bloody mom's body while I'm looking up at my father, and he has a cross-shaped tire iron in his hand, one of those things you use to take off the lug nuts on the cars. He had one of those in his hand, and he's standing over, screaming at him. I'm yelling at him, "You just killed my mom." Now, she wasn't dead, but she was beaten, bloody, and unconscious, and that was where I start my life. That's the beginning of my whole existence. My birth to 5, I was with my mom was like Linda Hamilton from Terminator 2, very survivalist. We were running from state to state because who we were running from was my birth father, who was the most vicious and violent man I've ever known. He was a veteran of the Vietnam War. And by the time I was born in 79, he had been back for a couple years and he was just a monster. He was a drug addict and just viciously violent. And as my earliest memories are running from state to state, trying to escape him, as when he would find us, he would beat and rape my mom and beat me and my brother, and just the most vicious kind of attacks. I have a memory of when I was really young of we were in a battered woman shelter. We had been running from battered woman shelter to battered woman shelter to escape from my father. And my mom was such a survivalist at the time that we even had security words. So if we were in a grocery store, if she said the word pocket, it didn't have to be in conversation. It just would come out of her. So if she would be ringing something up like, oh, $2.49 for the change, here you go, pocket. If that word came out of her mouth, that meant that I needed to grab the back of her pocket of her pants. We need to escape right now because my father was hunting us. That means he was on site. We need to go right this instant. And so my mom, we ended up living in battered woman shelters, trying to escape from him and going from place to place, trying to run away from my father. And I have an early memory of being at one of these battered woman shelters when my father comes up and he drives up and convinces me and my brother. I have a brother who's 2 years older than I was. So he was about 6, I was about 4, I believe, when this happens. And my father comes up and convinces me to get into his car, takes me and my brother, kidnaps us both. He then calls my mom at the shelter. And I know all this because of stories from my mom and news clippings from the incident, from what happened. He calls my mom at the shelter and says that one of us are dead and the other one's going to be dead if she doesn't meet him at this restaurant. And so, against the protestations of the battered woman shelter, she leaves and she goes to the place and she meets my father. And he is arguing with her, and during the middle of the argument, he stands up and flips over the table, and he has his classic weapon. He uses a big X-shaped tire iron. He holds that up over his head, and right then, everybody else in the bar pulls out a gun and points it at his head because the battered woman shelter had called ahead and filled the restaurant up with undercover police officers. So I had a news clipping when I was growing up of my father being let out of a restaurant with shotguns at his head after that incident. When my mom finally escaped from him, when I was about 5 years old, she sent me and my brother for a year up to go live with my grandparents up in Oregon. And mind you, we were living in Colorado, middle of the US. And she sent us to go live up to Oregon, which was supposed to be an escape, but it really wasn't an escape because trauma rolls downhill. And that was the hill my trauma was rolling down from. So she sent me to go live with my pedophile rapist uncle and my pedophile rapist grandfather and all of these, basically the vicious spots where all the demons were coming from. And while neither one of those people molested my brother or I, they did molest other children around us. And it was just really, really bad time. It was supposed to be an escape. And then when we finally got out of that, about a year later, she took us back to Colorado. My mom had left my father and got with my stepdad. Now, my father, living with him, that was like a Stephen King movie. It was abject violence and pain and horror and instant tragic graphic horror at the drop of a hat. With my stepdad now, my stepdad was like living in Scarface. It was crack cocaine, violence, and stealing, and crime, and lying. And when I met my stepdad, he was just getting out of prison for strong arm robbery. He would hijack entire delivery trucks that were going to a grocery store or to a Walmart or something and take all the stuff out of it and go sell it at the flea market. So I have memories growing up of standing in a flea market with like 12 cases of stainless steel scissors, and I have no idea where we got it from, but we're selling them at the flea market. And also because of that, I would occasionally have every Thundercats toy or every He-Man toy, all the different play sets that I would see on TV and all the action figures. But then I would also have someone burst into my bedroom at 3 o'clock in the morning with a duffel bag saying, we have 5 minutes to get out of here. We need to grab everything we can. We got to get out because the cops were there to investigate, or the social workers were there, or we were getting evicted, or any one of a million reasons why my parents needed to leave again. And what they would do, since this was late 80s, early 90s, they would bounce from state to state and basically change their whole identity. So we would live in Colorado, get evicted, drive across the state country for a night, end up in Oregon. My parents would create an entirely new identity, whole new rental history, whole new job history, and get a job, get an apartment. 6 months later, everything of that collapses because they couldn't really hold their job. They've been lying and stealing the entire time. So wash, rinse, repeat. You just bounce back and forth and do it again. You move back to Colorado, do the same scenario again, and just do that over and over again. So I was constantly living or moving around. I never went to a school in my whole life longer than 6 months. I went to about 30 or 40 different schools as I was growing up. I was constantly the new kid. I was, mind you, I'm 6 or 7, 8 years old at the time, and I am fat. I'm dirty. I'm smelly. My whole life is so chaotic that I actually brought crack to school. The drug crack cocaine. I brought it to school with me for show and tell, not to show to a teacher to try to get help, to show and tell, because I thought that was just what my family was doing. It was what was good. I wanted to show everybody the fun stuff at my house, and that kind of, I started to really internalize at that age that damage was somehow my fault, that I was the broken one. I was the one making us move. I was the one that was causing us to go everywhere, and it really, every time I reached out for help, it became a danger. And that was shown really early on. It was at one of the schools I was at. I think I was here in Colorado. I was walking to school, and had to have been 6 or 7 years old. I was walking to school, and as I get there, I defecate on myself on the walk to school, crap my pants. And I walked to school with that, and with crap-filled pants. And I went to school that entire day, just completely filthy. I came home, went back to school the next day, and I show up, and there's a box of supplies for me. Someone had brought in a box of school supplies. There was a box with a coat and some pants and a folder with a bunch of stuff and all these cool things. So I bring it home to my mom afterwards. I'm like, hey, check it out. I got all these school supplies. I can have new stuff now. And that was just a signal that they were too close. The next day we were gone. We had to move. People were getting too close to us. We needed to get out of there. And so that taught me that reaching out for help was a peril. If I reach out for help, then my mom could go to jail. My stepdad could go to jail. My brother could go to foster care. I could go to foster care because I tried to get help. So that's not something that I'm going to be doing anymore. I had to protect my family because that was really beat into us early on. Protect the mom, protect the family. We need to stay together. And so now, going into my preteen years of 9, 10, 11 years old, I am bouncing from school to school. I am very toxic. I am dirty, fat, and smelly. I don't change my clothes very often because I don't have any clean clothes. I just am nasty everywhere I go. And I at this time am assuming that I am the bottom at any social situation. So when I go to a new school, you see on movies where people go up to when they go to prison, guy goes up to the big tough guy in prison and punches the big tough guy to say, I can get here. I can go after the big dude. Well, I would kind of do that, only I would do the opposite. I would go to the most popular kid in the school and insult myself to him, because that would immediately put me at the bottom. If we would establish right away, I'm lower than you. I know I'm already down here. You don't got to beat me down to get me down here. I'm down here too. I have a better fat joke about myself than you can tell me. So I'm going to go ahead and insult myself for you. I'll just put myself here, So it kind of like cuts out the physical violence, but it puts me right where I believe I belong, which is at the bottom of everything. I believe that I'm already realizing that I am the nothing, that I'm not worth being there. And right around that time, in my preteen years, if someone were to ask me, so what do you want to be when you grow up? My answer was always, I don't want to be when I grow up. And that was just, I just never saw any future. And then I grow into my preteen years, 13, 14, 15 years old. Now I'm really starting to internalize that darkness. Now I start to get more aggressive with it, where I get more toxic and I lash out more. I am more insulting, not really toxic towards other people, really more toxic towards myself. I was toxic around other people, but not in the sense that I'm insulting the people I'm around. I'm not lashing out and attacking everybody else around me. I'm saying things that are really off color, really out of the norm, just offensive, but I'm not really insulting everybody around me. I'm more insulting myself. I'm degrading myself at every chance I can get. And it's important to bring another character into this situation at this point. So and one of the times when I moved to Colorado when I was 12, I met this other kid at a comic book shop. His name was Mike. Now, Mike was the only good spot in my life. Mike was kind of the opposite of me growing up. He had a very stable family, very loving, very caring. They live in the giant house at the end of a corner of one of the houses we moved at, and his family still lives there to this day. He was really supported. He went to anything he wanted, he would get. He would do things like make a Christmas list and get the things on his Christmas list, which just blew my mind. I had no idea that was a thing. Like, oh, what? You can make a list of gifts and get the things you ask for? I don't even know what this is. That was amazing to me. And so when I was bouncing from state to state, he never moved. So I memorized his phone number. So whenever I was in Colorado, I had a brief little bit of somewhere to be. And at first hanging out at his house, I could stay there for a week because, I'm just a friend down the street and his mom's nice, just a buddy's kid's friend. And could stay there for a while. Then after a while, it's a couple days. Then after a while, I can only stay there for a day or so because now I'm filthy. I'm dirty, and I'm so dirty that if I sit on the couch, if I stand up, you have to wash the spot because I'm so dirty. And that chaos of my life is just continuing. But Mike, at this point, he's just a friendly spot, okay? But I'm only able to be at his house for a couple hours at a time because now I'm now at 14 years old. I am now homeless. I have left home because I can't take the drugs and the violence and the crack anymore. I couldn't take the beatings anymore. So I just started living on the streets and started bouncing from friend's house to friend's house, kind of burning out resources. And that's where I would stay a week at Mike's house and then go to a week at another friend's house and kind of burn out all these different friend groups. And over the way, I gathered a group of what I call disaster groupies. They were kids who kind of lived vicariously through my darkness. Like they didn't have anything like me in their world, but so we would hang out. They would kind of like push me off the edge further, see how far I would go into the dark, kind of use my pain as a party favor. I would go hang out with them and talk about the hell I was living in. And it would be the fun of what we were doing. It would just be kind of a fun topic to talk about. So I would use my abuse as a party favor in the group. And this disaster groupie friend group, it ended up having its own house because one of the kids that was in it, his dad paid the rent for the house and his dad bought the food in the house, but his dad lived with his dad's girlfriend in another house. So the house became a teenage flop house where there's me, my two teenage friends, bunch of kids hanging out, just kind of a teenage party house. All right. And so I am at this point in time, I'm living basically three different lives where I have this disaster groupie house where I can use my pain as a party favor and use it as entertainment. I have my home with my mom and my family, which is just abject hell. It's crack cocaine and violence, but it's where all my stuff is. So I go there occasionally to recharge my stuff and grab everything. And that's my mom. How am I supposed to get away? That's my mom. And then for a couple hours a day, if I'm able to, I go to Mike's house and kind of have like a bright respite from all the pain. Okay. And that's kind of the stability of that chaos for 6-7 months that continues that way until that disaster groupie friend group ends in a big scene. We're having a big party. There's a bunch of kids partying. There's one of them invited a band over. Sorry, my cat's crawling all over me. One of them invited a band over. The band's playing. There's kids all over the place. I had gotten a hold of some LSD off the streets. So I was tripping acid with a bunch of kids. So we're having this big party. Right then, the parents arrive. Parents show up. Of course, everybody has to evaporate. All the kids go home. I don't get to go home. I get to go stay in my last place where I have, which is a field behind Casa Bonita. Because at this point, I've already burned out Mike's resources. Because another thing that happened right around 14, 15 years old was I started self-harming. I started cutting myself really bad. And it started as like an emotional regulatory thing. It started to, when I was back then, I described my life like I was living in a tsunami. Like I was just kind of sloshing back and forth in this kind of waves of anguish. Like, I don't know if anybody here has ever been to a heavy metal concert, but if you ever go to a concert or if you see a concert on TV, you'll see that they have the mosh pit, the big pit where everybody's spinning around and doing all the crazy stuff. Well, there's that part right in front of the mosh pit, between the mosh pit and the stage, where everybody's squished super tight together. Call that the sardine can. Okay. And when I would go to mosh pits when I would go to concerts when I was a teenager, when I was in that sardine can area, if you're there, it's so tightly packed, you can pick your feet up off the ground and kind of vertically crowd surf. Like you're not really out touching the ground, but you're not going to fall over. So the crowd just kind of moves you around. And that was how my life felt like at the time. Like I was just picking my feet up and letting the crowd slosh me around. But when I cut myself, even though it was damaging and it was destructive and I knew it was bad when I was doing it, it would calm those waves and it would make that tsunami lessen. And it was real and it was something that was mine that I could control. And I didn't have anything else in my life like that at the time that I could do that with. And I knew it was bad and I knew it was damaging and I knew I shouldn't be doing it, but it was real and it was mine. And so it started as that kind of emotional regulatory thing. But it quickly, into my teen years, grew into just straight up self-harm and self-punishment, where I'm cutting myself really deep and I am leading blood trails around where I'm sitting and just bad times, showing up my arm completely covered in cut marks. And at my house, that at my home, that was just, it wasn't even ignored, it was laughed at. One time I came home and I was sitting up in my bedroom and I was cutting myself. And my mom walked past the bedroom and she laughed and literally started laughing at me. And she's like, "Oh, you're just doing that again?" Started chuckling and walked down the stairs. And okay, so staircase is on one side of the room, couch is on the other side of the room. TV is next to the staircase, so couch is looking at the staircase. Okay, so stairs coming down behind the TV. So she's sitting on her couch laughing at me. I walk down behind the staircase and I'm like, "You think this is a joke?" And I hold up my arm and I pull out a box cutter razor blade and just start hacking at my arm, really, really bad. Blood starts spurting. My mom just looks at me. I woke up to my bedroom, wrapped a t-shirt around my arm, sat down, picked up my video game controller and started playing games. She never came and checked on me. She never came up to see if I was okay. I just sat there and played games. That kind of hell, I couldn't take that for long periods of time. I could never stay at home. I could never spend the night because there would always be crack fights. There'd always be violence going on. I just couldn't take it anymore. So I was always out of there. I was always staying at that disaster befriending group. But now I am, when that friend group dissipates and everybody else gets to go home, I don't get to go home. I have already burned out my resources at Mike's house. I can't go stay there. I can't go back to my mom's house because of the violence. So the only place I have is there's this restaurant in Colorado called Casa Bonita. And behind that restaurant, there was a field. Now, I don't know if you guys ever watched the TV show South Park, but South Park did an episode on Casa Bonita. It's a big Mexican restaurant here in Colorado where they have cliff divers and they have it's like this big theme restaurant in a strip mall. And that really is true. The restaurant really is that way. They have a gorilla and a cliff divers and all this stuff. But behind the restaurant, they had a field. And in the field, there was a dip where you couldn't see it. If I was laying in the dip, you couldn't see me if you were driving on the street. So nobody thought there was a body laying in the field or anything like that. And so when I didn't have anywhere else to be, I would go to that field. And if it was too cold, if the field wouldn't work, I would go to Mike's shed because at the back of Mike's house, there was a tool shed. Okay. And in Mike's tool shed, there was a big puffy recliner chair, like a lazy boy style chair. And they had kind of a half roof. The roof had kind of wood slats with gaps in it. So it would kind of keep the rain out, but you could see the stars in the sky. And so I would sit there if it was too cold and too rainy. And so that after that disaster befriend group ends, I end up bouncing now between that field and Mike's tool shed. And one night I'm in the tool shed and I'm cutting myself so bad that there's a pool of blood forming on the ground underneath me. And it's the middle of the night and I'm thinking, I got to get some help or I'm going to die. If I don't do something, I'm going to die. And so occasionally in my life, social services had tried to intervene. They had been one of the reasons why we evaporated and moved a couple of times. So I thought, hey, I'm going to call social services on myself. I'm going to try to do that. Maybe they can help me. So when the dawn came, I knocked on Mike's back door and I asked for bus fare from his mom and I borrowed a phone book. And I called the social services office on myself. And I set a meeting for later that afternoon. And it was dawn when I called and 3 or 4 in the afternoon, but when the meeting was, when we got there, I took the bus there. When I got there, they called my mom in too. So we sit at this table, this big round table. At one end, there's these counselors, and at the other end, there's me and my mom. And they say, "So what are we here for? What are we about?" And so I pull out a box cutter razor blade, one of the square style. I throw it on the table. It's fresh blood on it. So that's what we're here for. I said, I feel like I'm nothing. I feel like I'm worthless. I show him the fresh cuts on my arms. I feel like I'm at the bottom. I feel like there's nothing here for me. My mom, who is the most practiced liar I've ever known, she got them to believe he's just making it all up. He's just doing it for attention. He just does it for a rise. He just trying. He does it all the time. It's okay. We can handle it. And they sent me home with her. And we got 3 or 4 blocks from the place. And she turns to me and snarls and says, "Next time you should do a better job, and I'll buy you the razor blades." Like, oh, okay. You think I'm a monster? I'll show you what a monster is now. That dark that I've been kind of wrapping around, using it as a blanket, kind of using it as a costume to keep everybody away. I just dove straight into it. Now you think you think I'm bad? I'll show you what that is. And so for the next 9 months, I went on what I call scorched earth, where I went to destroy every bit of positive in my life. If you liked me, I would break that. If you were whatever positive you thought of me, I would do my best to prove you wrong. Whatever you liked about me, I would offend that. Whatever you liked the most, I would purposefully do that to break you. And during this time, I also went to as many family members as I could, charmed them or snuck into their houses, got into their photo albums, gathered every picture of me into a pile I could and burned them. I was trying to annihilate my past. So currently, there's like 6 pictures of me that exist before the age of 18. And so after 9 months of that, of solid personal social destruction, where I went to Mike and I stole 3 of his long boxes of comic books and went and sold them at comic shops. I would just offend and be as mean and toxic to everybody as I possibly could. And now I am alone. And I'm in that field by Casa Bonita. And I've been there for about a month. And I hadn't changed my clothes, hadn't taken my shoes off in weeks, but I also wasn't wearing socks. My feet were just rotting off of my body. I was surviving by stealing free samples from the grocery store next to the field and being on school grounds during the school day so truancy officers wouldn't arrest me. But I wasn't going to class. Only classes I would actually go to during that time were choir class and English class. So at the end of this, if you guys want to ask questions about why, I'll tell you why. But those are the only 2 classes I would ever go to were choir class and English class. So I wake up in the morning of this field in the snow, and I'm in 2 inches of snow. And the 2-block walk to get from the field to the grocery store at the top of the hill, I wasn't just shaking, I was seizing. I can't breathe. I can't do it. I could barely get up there. I get up to the top of the hill, go to the bathroom, and I'm washing my face off in their bathroom. And I look in the mirror, I can barely recognize myself. And I think I'm going to die. I don't want to die. I got to get some help. I got to figure out something to do. And so across the street from the school that I was nominally at, there was a building that said mental health. Now, I didn't know what it was for, but I knew it said mental health, so I'm just going to go in there cold. I'm not going to warn them I'm coming in because last time they brought my mom in, I'm not doing that again. So I just went in there cold. And they had me meet this young woman. She was in her early 20s, and I don't really remember much about that conversation because all I really remember is the end of it. And she said, "I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do. I can't help you." And when I walked out that door and stood on that porch, I felt my brain break. I felt my brain snap like a mirror, like shards of glass in my head. And a couple things happened immediately, one right after the other one, like instant things happened. First thing that happened was I found out what was at the bottom of that tsunami. When you go all the way down to the bottom of that tsunami, you go to the bottom of that mosh pit, it gets really quiet and it gets really still because there's nothing left to lose. What are you going to do? You cut my arm off? I'm going to die. You're going to put me in jail? You're going to feed me. I don't have any more down. Like, this is it. And right then, all the plans that I want to do crystallized in my head. Because when I'm hanging out with those disaster groupie friends, when we're hanging out, instead of talking about sports or girls or movies, we talk about mass murder. So if you're going to kill 10 people, what would you do? If you're going to shoot up a school, what would you do? It was just kind of the fiction of the group. There was a bunch of depressed kids navigating depression with no adult supervision, but that was just what we were talking about. It was the toxic in the air. And so while I was standing on that porch, I knew immediately what I was going to do. I'd already gamed through the plans. I already worked it through with my friends. I already talked through the whole system. I was either going to go through the mall food court and kill everybody that I could and die by suicide by cop, or I was going to go to the school food court and kill everybody I could and die by suicide by cop. Because both places were what we consider hard targets. The school had uniformed officers stationed at the front doors at all times. And the mall literally had a police station a couple doors down from the food court. But that was just factored into my plan. My plan was to buy a gun from the gangbangers that stood next to the ROTC building at the high school, who bought and sold drugs for my family all the time. And I could easily get them drugs. I went to my mom, stole an ounce of weed out of my brother's pocket, took it to the guy. He's like, "Hey, give me an ounce of weed. I'll get you a gun. Here you go." That was the easiest part. I was just waiting 3 days to get the gun. So I had the plan all set, had the gun all set to go. I knew what I was going to do. I had lost all care in life. And I was waiting 3 days to get the gun. And as soon as I got the gun, the only difference in time would be that I would go, if it's daytime, go to the school, nighttime, go to the mall. That's the only difference in the attack. Now, in that 3 day time, I didn't think it then, but looking back, I think I was saying goodbye. I was going in a much more calm way to the people that I knew. And like, I went and was giving away every comic book I had to the people that I was around. Comic books were the only things I carried. When I was going state to state, comic books were my big thing. I would carry crates of my comic books when my clothes and my stuff were left back at the house. Comic books were my escape. But I was giving away to everybody that I saw these times. I would just walk past, hand whole stacks of them to kids that I would walk past. I would go to my ex-girlfriend's house and say, "Thank you for letting me sleep in the gravel outside your window." And just not planning for anything to do the next day, just saying thank you for my life in the past. I'm just trying to write the last bit of my life and be done. I just want to close my book and be over. And so in that, I went to Mike's house. And I knocked on Mike's door, and I was in tears. And when he brought me in, he just kept on telling me, "You're a good kid in a shit world." So he kept on saying over and over again, "You're a good kid in a shit world." And he never asked me what I was doing. He never inquired. Mike knew intimately the hell I was living in. He knew it was his house, his bedroom that I was sitting there crying with my arms covered in cuts. It was his table that I was sat at my 16th birthday when my mom beat me bloody and ripped my shirt off. And I sat at his kitchen table crying on the night of my 16th birthday when his mom came and figured out what I was doing there. She walked in with a brownie with a big red table candle sticking in it and singing me happy birthday for my 16th birthday while I'm covered in blood and bruises at his table. He knew the hell I was living in, but he didn't ask. He just kept on telling me, "You're a good kid in a shit world." And he gave me food. He gave me a shower. And for me, it was like when I knocked on his door, I wasn't a person. I was a walking ball of nothing ready to explode. I wasn't there to see a friend. I was there to say goodbye. And I was ready to be done with my whole life. I wasn't there to be seen. I wasn't there to talk. I was just there to say, "Thank you for letting me exist. You were good to me while I was here, and I'm done now." And that was what I was there for. And what he did when he brought me in it was like being seen for the first time when you don't even feel invisible, you feel erased. Like I was a nothing, and he didn't see that. He put the tiny granular bits of my humanity on the bottom shelf of my life. Like, it wasn't that I could sit with a friend and have food. It was that, oh, I can like food. I can enjoy things. It was as simple as that. And he just brought me in, and I never left his house for a week. I never went and got the gun. He's still my best friend to this day. He saved me that day from stopping me from committing that atrocity. And it's important to note, though, that it's not like a light switch flipped. It's not like, ding, one night with a friend, everything's better. Everything's fine now. The world's good. That's not it at all. What he did was, it was like I was the waves about to crash on the ocean. What he did was let me set my feet down on the sand for the first time in years and take a breath and let the waves recede and let me just be for a minute and just sat with me in that pain. And it was like the trauma pimple I was about to explode on everybody was able to recede. I was able to reconnect with myself. And almost instantly, over that couple of days, I went from aggressive to remorseful. The depression was still there, but it went from outward to inward. I was regretful and remorseful of what I had planned, and I was depressed. But again, the waves had receded enough to now I'm thinking more logically. Now I'm able to kind of assess myself more as a human. And Mike gave me a bit of a frame shift. He gave me some place to stay to just give me a little bit of an environmental shift for a little while to be able to assess who I am. Okay. But again, it's not like a light switch flipped. It's not like everything's better. I still have the same home life, same hell at home, the same mom, same, all that shit was still the same. Excuse my language. And then, so now we're going to fast forward a bit. That was from 16 to 17, okay, age 16 to 17. It took about a year. Now we're going to fast forward slightly to the night of my 19th birthday, right? The night of my 19th birthday, I'm planning on committing suicide because I was done. The depression had grown up again, and now it had gone inward. And I was ashamed of what I had planned before. I was ashamed of me all the way around. I was just tired of being a burden in everybody's life. I felt like I was that I was forcing everybody to deal with me, and I was tired of being the burden for everybody. And so that day, I had bought a ton of LSD off the streets. I had gotten a giant bag of cocaine off my mom and stolen a bunch of pills from my mom. Way more drugs than we need to do the job. Copious amounts of narcotics. And my goal was to spend the day as normal as I could and just be a regular everyday day. And then at the end of the day, go to Mike's house go to the field by Casa Bonita and kill myself. That was my plan. I wanted to end my life in the field by Casa Bonita. But in the day, I went to Mike's house because I wanted to have as normal a day as I could. I wanted to be as regular as I could be. And so, but I wasn't going to tell anybody. So I went to Mike's house, and he is a very social person. He has a social circle of his own. And one of the people in this friend group is a girl named Amber. Okay. Amber was always really nice to me. She was really friendly. She was his friend, his contact. And so we would occasionally go over to her house and like watch a movie, listen to music, do whatever. But she was his friend. And so I went to his house, and he's like, hey, we're going to go kick it at Amber's today. I'm like, hey, that's great. That's a great last day. I'm going to go spend it with two of my favorite people and have a great day, and then go to that field and end my life. And that's a great way to spend my last day on earth. And we get there, and that wasn't it at all. I actually walked into a surprise birthday party for me. I walked into about 14 people singing happy birthday, and Amber had baked me a blueberry peach pie, and I walked past him and dropped all my drugs in the toilet, and that was the last time I ever tried to kill myself. And you know what's really great about that story is that when we left that house, when we left Mike's house, there was no party waiting for me. We left Mike's house, and he called ahead. He said, hey, I got Aaron in the car. It's his birthday today. And Amber already had a friends group. She already had friends over. She already had a pie baked and everything, but they're a bunch of artists. So they got together, got a bunch of decorations together, and threw a bunch of decorations up. I walked in to a fundamentally life-changing experience that changed me to my core of my whole world, that altered the course of my life, that my friend put up in 5 minutes because a buddy was having a party. You never know what you might do that could change someone's entire world. So if you see someone that needs that kind of love, give it to them. Give love to the ones that you think deserve it the least because they need it the most. That kid sitting in the dark, telling himself that he hates himself, telling himself that everybody hates him and he's the cause of all the problems and he's the reason why everybody's wrong and he's the reason why everybody's broken. Remind him that he's wrong. Remind him that he can exist in this pain and he can make it through it. That at the end of it, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I have found my light today. As I sit here today, I'm a happy father of 4. I have a beautiful wife, 4 beautiful children, and my children are never going to be able to do what I'm doing today. My kids are not going to be able to sit here in 30 years and tell about the abuse that happened to them. And because of that, I won at life. So if you see anybody that needs that love, give them the love. Give love to the ones that you feel deserve it the least because they need it the most. Thank you, guys. I'd like to open it up for questions now. I apologize. I cry every time I do this. So if anybody has any questions, feel free. If there's no questions off limits and nothing is too personal. If you have a question, ask it because the deep ones are the good ones.
Okay. I'll perhaps jump in while people I know there's 1 or 2 posts in the chat, but we often think that it's the social services, it's the experts, it's the professionals that are really there to create change. And I think we often overemphasize our own importance in life. But for you, it seemed very much that there was just like normal people who just showed and reached out to you. Was that in general for your whole turning points in your life? It was just normal people doing human things, or were there experts?
It really is.
Yeah.
No, it really is. And that's an important dynamic to realize is that when you're in the dark, it's equally depersonalizing to be looked at as a monster and as a project. If I'm broken, then that's the same as if you're afraid of me. And neither one of those are a person. If you're trying to fix me, then you're automatically on top of me. You're automatically ahead of me. You're superior, and I'm underneath, and you're fixing me. Something is not equal there. Mike, he helped me my entire life. He's still my best friend to this day. I just talked to him 2 days ago. Still my best friend of this life. He is the one person in the world that if he insulted my wife, I'd be like, well, baby, what did you do to make him call you a name? Like, that's because he's earned that in my life. But it was the consistency. Never once in my friendship with him have I ever felt like I'm anything but an equal. Ever. And he's never, we've been friends now for 33 years. 33 years we've been best friends. So I just turned 45. And the entire time we've been a friend, there's never been a screw you moment. There's never been an insulting fight ever. We've been upset with each other. We've had problems, but it's always been with care and compassion and logic and reason. And I saw someone's question that just came up on the chat. Why a school? So it is important to note that my personal targets were the damage that I was going to cause to make the real targets hurt. My actual targets were my parents. My real targets were I wanted to make them deal with making me. I wanted to have them finally deal with accountability for something and have to deal with the ramifications of creating the monster that I knew that I was. So the school and the mall were totally just ancillary. That was the damage that I was going to cause, but it wasn't directed at those places. It was the damage was directed at my parents, but I didn't want to hurt them because to me, hurting them is the quick way out. That's the easy way. That's fast. They had never faced accountability for anything. They had if they were getting evicted in Colorado, they moved to Oregon, invented a whole new identity, and got a new life. They never faced anything. And so I wanted them to have to deal with making me because I was having to deal with me every day. And I wanted to have them to deal with my reality. And so that's the important thing for them. But it wasn't, and also today, a lot of those people that were students in the school are now friends of mine and big supporters because the reality of the situation is we really were a bunch of depressed kids navigating depression with no adult supervision. There was a lot. While my story might sound outlandish and my story might sound like a crazy movie, you each know at least 10 of me, at least. If one of you aren't me yourself, because the only thing special about my story is that I talk about it. It's not that I exist, because there's me everywhere. It's this kind of. I always say that there's a small sliver of people that really will follow through with an attack. But there's a giant gray area of people that think that they could, should, or might. And those are the ones that we can reach. The ones that are sitting there with their, if your internal dialogue is that I hate myself and everything's terrible and everybody hates me. And you're at home, it's everybody hates you and you're terrible and everything's bad. And your friend group is everything's terrible and everybody hates you and everything's bad. And then you try to reach out for help. You try to go to the counseling office. You go to the counseling office and you don't know what you might say that could make the jaws of death snap down and kill you because that person on the other side of the room has a bunch of mandatory reporting lines. And if you say something that goes over their limit, they're going to call the authorities and they're going to crush your world. So since you don't even know what you might say that can crush your world, you're not going to say anything. So the help that's there to try to get help, you can't get the help because the help could hurt you. And everybody at home says you're terrible. And so now you have internalized that and now you're the bad one. And so how are you going to get rid of the bad? Get rid of yourself. And it's the scaffolding nature of this kind of depression. And that's the only way that I personally can find it when people reach out to me now is by reminding them that the only thing constant in life is change. The only thing absolutely certain in my life at 16 was that if I made it to 17, it would be different. That it's not that you're not going to be the same. It will change. And if I stayed in that hell, it was going to destroy me. But if I adapted with the changes, I could grow and become the man I am today.
So if I just read between the lines.
Yeah, that was a bit of a ramble on 3 different question answers. So sorry about that. But
I'm going to go through the other questions, but if I read between your lines in terms of what schools should focus, yes, I mean, professional services are important, but schools should equally focus on creating, not even expecting kids to be counselors, but just kids to be friends and to set up social support groups amongst each other that are supportive and caring and nurturing, not expecting them to be the professional.
So I think that one of the biggest missed resources that schools have, and I say this as an outsider that constantly speaks, I'm a regular guy. Here in Colorado, up until 2 weeks ago, I ran a gas station. I have no educational background. I have no law enforcement, none of that. I'm just a regular person. But I've had the opportunity now to speak at a lot of these law enforcement conferences. Let's talk to federal agencies and counseling agencies and all these different people trying to deal with in this field. And from my perspective, the biggest missed opportunity is talking to the kids themselves about what we can do, what you think we can do to help you. Because I see the police have ideas of what they can do. I see the teachers have ideas of what they can do. And I see the counselors have ideas of what they can do. And from the kids' perspective, this isn't a menu of help. This is not a menu of help to choose from. This is an array of landmines to navigate around to figure out which one of these adults is really telling the truth with their help. Which one of these adults are really telling the truth and really isn't going to fake the funk and really isn't lying to me and isn't going to turn me in when they tell them something serious and isn't going to backbite me and talk crap on me to everybody else and isn't going to label me as a threat and isn't going to do all the different things that make me regret going out to get help in the first place. So instead of having this menu of assistance that is offered, it's a bunch of landmines the kids navigate around, and the kids carry in their pockets every encyclopedia ever written. They're fact checking every adult they come in contact with. Everybody you're talking to, they know whether you're telling the truth or whether you're lying. And they're going to look up your background and see whether you lied in the past. And if you lie, then you're done. And if they fact check you and you're wrong, then you're done. And they will talk to themselves about how to get the help. That's how you end up in a school where you have the full threat assessment team looking at it. And the only person in the school that knows anything is the teacher's assistant in the choir class, because that teacher's assistant in the choir class got all the information, because that's the one safe person those kids can go to, because he's the one person that's not going to turn them in and blow the world up. So everybody in your array of help didn't get any information, but that one TA got all the downloads, and he's your really good source. Because, and that goes back to my earlier point about choir and English class. English class for me, I went to English class because I just loved it. I loved words. I started reading super early. I started reading full novels when I was 3 or 4 years old. First book report I ever did was on Misery by Stephen King, because that was my favorite of his books. I read them at that point. And so I just sucked in information like a sponge. So English was super easy for me. Choir class I went to, and I think if any of you are educators or in education, I think that your music/choir classes probably have 40 to 60% of each class is either on the emotional or identity spectrum. Because I think choir class is a magnet class for kids like that, because it's the one class in the school where you're under zero chance of failing that day. You're not going to have a paper that you take home to your abusive parents and have them sign and explain why you failed that class. And if you're standing in choir class and you don't want to participate, you stand there and you go, you're totally fine. You're all right. You just move your lips. You're good. You stand there. You want to scream. You scream. You're good. No one's going to care. If you engage how you want to engage, and because there's not the instant peril that I failed today, I need to go home and explain why I failed. I need to deal with my abusive family and tell them why I failed, and I have to hold that failure in. I didn't have to participate today, and that was okay. And now I can release, and now I can go. And so that's how your choir teacher and that TA ends up being the safe download. It ends up being the place where everybody feels they can finally come and talk to. Because this is also the one class that doesn't look like it's in it doesn't, from the kid's perspective, it doesn't look like it's in the chain of peril. It's not in that chain of devastation that is connected directly to the law enforcement and directly to the principal. You know, if you go talk to your choir teacher, that conversation might stay there.
Mm. Wow.
I think this is actually a great opportunity to tag on to a question that we had in the chat. There was someone who asked, Peter Schmutz asked, how is the depression groupie friend group's attitude to adults? How would you sketch the type of adult who would be able to break through a group of kids like that? So you talked a little bit about that, but if you wanted to expand, please do.
Absolutely. So the attitude towards adults, it was varied. There was a kind of a menu about that. Some of us were really reluctant to deal with adults. At the time, it wasn't even like reluctance and fear, it was antagonism. It was that you don't know what the hell you're talking about because you don't see who I really am. It's when you live in that depression enough and you've internalized that darkness enough to where you know you're bad and you know you're terrible. Anybody looking at you and saying, oh, you're a good person, then you're lying. Because if you knew me, then you'd see the monster that I am. So if you think I'm good, then you're full of crap. I'm dismissing you. So a large portion of it was that. I just dismiss off the top because you're trying to blow smoke up my butt. You don't know who I really am because you don't see the full me. And then there's the other part of it where it's utilitarian. How much can I get out of this adult? How much can I use it for a resource? Because that's the only thing I can get out of this adult that's good. Okay. So those are the two biggest sections are the resources. Can I use you as a resource, or am I afraid of you? And are you going to blow me up from talking to me? And then you would have the kind of antagonistic aspect of it, where it's like challenging. And honestly, that's the spot where you can connect. So this is a weird dynamic. When you are that kid in the dark and you are the one who's chaotic, you test and you lash out at people, and you test harder on the people that you trust the most. And because you are basically saying, okay, you can handle me at a 2 when I'm lashing out. Can you handle me at a 4? All right, you're still there. How about if I'm at a 6? You're still there. How about if I'm at an 8? Are you still there? Because if you're gone now, then I'm gone. Because I live at a 10. So if you can't handle me at an 8, then you still aren't there. Because I live at 10. So and that's the test that I will push you through. So in that test, if you've crumbled at 6, then you're done. You're out. You're finished. You're one of those ones that's now turned into a landmine that I'm navigating around. But if you can stand at 10, if you can stand at 12, then you're really the one. Then I'll pull back to 8. Then I'll pull back to 6. Then I'm going to pull back to 2 because now you're the trusted one. Then I might even protect you if anybody else comes at you because now you're the one that I will trust and I will actually listen to because you're the only one that stood through that fire. And in that, after you do that, you'll be the one that'll be able to call me on my bullshit. You'll be able to the one that call me to task and say, nope, you want to get better? This is what you need to do. You saw where you were failing there. You need to get better here. You need to get better here. And you can trust me because I stayed at 12. And that is a big key because these kids you're encountering, they're testing everybody. And most people crumble at 5 or 6 because the adults in the room have put up so many lines to protect themselves and so much indemnification to make sure that they're not liable, make sure that they're not responsible, make sure that they're not accountable for anything. And the kids know this. Remember, they're carrying the sum total of human knowledge. All the training material that you guys have, they have too. So you have to assume that they're taking the same class as you do. And so if you aren't able to stay at a 12 and address them back as a regular person at a 2 afterwards, then you're off the menu. But that one person that can, then you're a Mike. Then that's a lifelong connection that cannot be severed, and you'll listen to that person even if you don't want to. That's the kind of connection where I'll yell at you and tell you that you're wrong, and then I'll sit home and stew about that for hours, and then I'll come back to you tomorrow and tell you were totally right. I'm going to change my whole perspective because of what you say, because you made it through, because you lasted, because you weren't faking the funk, and you were able to exist in the worst of my fire. Because that's what the friends do. That's why the friend who's in the peer group side, that's why they get so much trust, because the kids, when I go to talk at schools and for administration and for students, 2 different presentations. Administration is a presentation you guys got. I have to spend a lot of time talking about the details of the emotions to get you reconnected with your own past, try to connect you with your own history, remind you what it was like to be a kid in pain. The kids know this language. They speak this language fluently. They know exactly what I'm talking about. They know exactly the things I'm saying. They speak this whole language of depression like it's second nature to them. And the more the adults don't see that, the further that gap grows between, are the adults really helping or they're not? It all fundamentally boils down to a fundamental question. Is this help or is this help hurt? If this help is help, I can stay. If this help is hurt, you're done. And I'm going to test you until I can see whether this help isn't hurting me anymore. Because that help over there that said it was a counselor that they can listen to, the instant I told that help that I was cutting myself, now I'm in a 3-day treatment center. And now my brother's in foster care. My mom's in jail because I tried to get some help. Now my entire life is destroyed.
So I think what I'm
You
getting
know?
from that is, things that we traditionally think of as help are not actually helping. And so like the person, maybe like adults and kids in the schools, the characteristics of those people have to be safe according to the person who needs the help. And that looks like, you need to be able to deal with the real person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
And
and
it's not that it doesn't help. It's that it doesn't appear to help. Remember, this is the perspective of the kid
yeah,
in the dark. So
yeah.
it's more, there's also a lot of fear factored into that, and a lot of lack of self-worth, that I'm not good enough, that if they listen to me, they're not going to care anyway. There's a lot of self-doubt that's involved in that. So it's not so much that the help isn't there, the help doesn't actually help. Because sometimes, even in that pain, even if taking that kid into care, even doing all that stuff, that's the help that needed to be helped. But for the kid in the dark, trying to access that help, these are the fears that you encounter. This is the static that makes your brain not be able to go to anywhere except for your own help. Because you get so afraid that person on the other side is lying to you. That counselor is gonna turn you in. Like, these are the things
Yeah.
that fuel your own dark in your own head. And the other and I'd say 70% of the time it's off base. Where you're if the person in the dark pumps you a little further, they would see that really that's a person who's really trying to actually help and really will be there to listen to them. But there's so much fear. It's like touching the hot stove. After you touch the hot stove 3 times, you're not going to go close to the hot stove. That's up until even as an adult, sitting here 45 years old, I have a really hard time talking to a counselor, because I had those 2 times growing up of going to counseling that were the 2 most devastating times in my life. I have a hard time accessing that. And that's as a logical adult who even deals in the field now, like, that sees the reality of it. I still have to get past my own emotional biases that this really is help and this isn't actually hurt. I have to go past that same kind of dynamic.
Yeah, that's totally understandable, especially given your past. And also in the beginning, you said something about, there's the perception if you're going to therapeutic services, somehow that therapist, that there's a power imbalance there, even though, right, like they teach us in psychology to be present with the person, it's client led, but right, it's all from the perspective of the client, the person who's experiencing the help and what they're bringing in to the room for traditional, social services and help. So
And
completely get that.
The best key tip for that, to break down that barrier of this is someone who's looking at me like I'm a project. The easiest way to break that is what I say: tiny breaks of protocol, little tiny breaks of protocol. Nothing that's going to violate any systems, nothing that goes against any procedures or any kind of rules, nothing like that. I'm talking, play a silly song, button your shirt wrong, say something stupid, so do something that makes you a person with a job. Because that dynamic, everybody can understand. The kid in the dark, the student knows what it's like to be a person with a job. They're a person with a job too. If I'm coming in to talk to you as a counselor, I'm Aaron, who's a student. I'm not just student. If you just see student, then I'm just a product to you. But if you see Aaron, who's a student, and you're Michelle, who's a counselor, that's 2 people with jobs that can interact. Okay. So this is a real life example from my own 16-year-old. When he was dealing with counseling, 17, he hates it when I say 16. He yells at me every time. He just turned 17. When he was dealing with counseling because he had abuse from his birth mom. And so when he was dealing with his own counseling, we have 2 distinct types. Counselor A, you have checklists, you have journals, you have 12 steps of programs, you have all these different things, turns into static, just white noise, just washes right over the kid. He just doesn't pay any attention at all. Counselor B, you walk into the room. Oh, you listen to BTS? I listen to BTS. Let's jam out for a while. 15 minutes later, you get the same journal, the same checklist, the same procedures. You get full buy-in from the kid. Now, Counselor A, you ignore completely. Counselor B, we literally invited to Christmas. The only difference was that Counselor B saw my kid as a kid before they interacted as a counselor. But before you tried to interact with me as a professional, meet me as a human. And then we can go forward from there. Start the engagement as an equal. And then I can understand, because in that, if you start the engagement that I'm a person with a job, then I know in your job, you know more about your job than I do. Okay. So then you can have the superiority of the knowledge of the job. that I, as a counselor, I know this is my world. This is what I'm talking about. And also in that, give the respect to assume that as a student, he knows more about his world than you do.
Mhm. Mhm.
That he knows more about being a
Um,
student than you do. And that's
yeah.
having that dynamic is important, in my opinion. Equalizes.
Oh, it absolutely is. And I think depending on the culture that you're in, so as an American, I came from a culture in which that there was more of a tendency to not necessarily greet or meet the person first, right? And maybe some other cultures are just naturally better at that. But that's definitely a good takeaway. I wanted to raise a question in the chat because we're on that topic right now. It's a question of what keeps you grounded and centered now, despite your traumatic childhood.
Yeah. These days, well, so that's an important part to bring in the another portion of my story, which is what I went through a period starting at the age of 19. I went through a thing where I call acknowledgement. That's where I really started the healing process of what I did. So it started actually as a direct incident where so remember, I was still kind of 20% hooked to my mom because it's my mom. I didn't have my mom hooks fully out of me till I was in my mid 30s, just because it's my mom. What are you supposed to do? How are you supposed to get away from that? And so I am. This happens about 6 or 7 months after that birthday party story I told you guys. So now I am bartending at a Veterans of Foreign Wars bar here in Denver, in Colorado, and it's a bar where old veterans of wars can go and drink in the early daytime. So 10 o'clock in the morning, World War II veterans are sitting there drinking. My mom was manager of the bar, and I'm bartending, and she wasn't there with me. But this is a Friday night and busy night. At the other side of the bar, there's my aunt, one of my stepdad's sisters, who had tried to molest me when I was younger. She tried to kill herself a couple times in front of me. She drugged through the carpet for crack rock, one of the abusers. Okay. And so she's on the other side of the bar talking with a bunch of people. And it's a loud, raucous Friday night, and I'm back bartending. And I don't know what the conversation is, but I'll hear the conversation as her saying, "Oh, Aaron, you know you love me." And I stopped cold and I said, "No, I don't." And I didn't mean to say that. It just came out. But I said, "No, I don't." And she stopped and she said, "What?" I said, "I don't actually love you. You tried to kill yourself in front of me. You tried to molest me. I don't love you. I'm done." And she blew up. She started screaming. And it was like an anvil jumped off my chest, like instant release. And it kind of freaked me out. I went home and I'm like, wow, something just happened there. This was different. I need to focus on that for a bit. And so I went on a period of my acknowledgement where I went to the people that hurt me, and I did that again, where I went to them and specifically said, "You did this, and I'm done." And it was really important to not do it in a retaliatory way. I did never do it in a sense that you did this and you need to pay, because to me that just makes the contest go back and forth. That it continues the chaos. I'm not trying to engage your chaos anymore. I'm done. And so I went to them and said, our relationship is fundamentally changed. I don't actually love you. I'm finished and I'm done. And I walked away. Some of them yelled, some of them cried, some begged me not to go. And for me, none of that mattered. It had nothing to do with their response. It had everything to do with getting it out of me. Because now I can confidently sit and say, I never think, oh my God, I hope they knew how I feel. I wish they could understand how I feel about it. They know how I feel, and they know I'm fine with telling them again. And that's why with me finally coming out publicly about it in 2018, because up until 2018, I thought this was a black mark around my neck, that if anybody ever found this out, they would hate me. And that it was just like, it wasn't something I hid, but it was just part of my past that just, it's not the kind of thing you bring up in party conversation. It's not like we just bring up as a topic of talking, but it was one of the black marks in my life. And I thought that if anybody ever really found out, they would hate me. And then when I came out, that wasn't it at all. It all changed. But up until then, I thought that would be the black mark. But with that acknowledgement, it let everything go. And now when I came out with my story, the only people that attack me about it are my family. And not that I'm saying anything that's not the truth. My mom and my brother and my family on that side, they attack me because I'm talking. My response to them has been from the beginning, if you're upset about me saying something that would happen to me 35 years ago, but you're not paying attention to who I am today, then I'm not the one that has a problem. And I'll stop the instant you tell me one thing that's not the truth. But that's because I'm gonna own my own life and I'm gonna own my own existence, and they're not gonna get that power over me anymore. And so yeah, nowadays I'm a happy guy.
That's awesome. So it sounds like forgiveness was probably some sort of forgiveness, and maybe like breaking the toxic relationships off
It was both of
completely
that,
and setting those boundaries. Yeah.
It was forgiveness for both them and myself. A big portion of that was realizing that it wasn't me that was the dark, that I wasn't as broken as I had thought I was the whole time. That realizing that up until I was about 13 years old, I didn't really have any agency over anything. I didn't have any control over where I was living or who I was around or what I was eating or what I was doing. I was dealing with the life that was handed to me. And I made some really bad decisions after that of how to cope with that. I take full ownership of my own decisions and how I dealt with my own pain. But that pain was handed to me. That pain wasn't my creation. And it was a fundamental thing to realize in my own head, to realize that I wasn't the one that was causing all of that pain, that I wasn't the one that was broken, that I wasn't the one that was causing the hell, that this hell was handed to me. And having that realization that inside I was really good, that person back in the day, he wasn't lying to me, that really saying I was a good person, that was the real me. The lie was telling myself I was broken the entire time. That's the lie. That depression lies to you, and that pain lies to you and reminds you how terrible you are. And in reality, that's all just a lie. The real me was the sweet, smart, sensitive kid who loved romance novels and loved comic books and loved Shakespeare. Like, that was the real me. And I had to go through all the hell to find myself again.
Yeah, we had a member mention, well, ask the question, you sort of answered it, that if you could travel back in time and you had the ability to help your younger self, how would you deal with that? And you kind of just mentioned that you kind of look back on yourself with some compassion and realize that, you know, your real you was covered over by things that were completely out of your control. So it sounds like that's the way you help yourself today, and might have helped yourself back then too, if you had a choice or a chance to change it.
Yeah, I would tell myself the same things I would tell other kids in those same shoes, is just keep walking. Just keep walking. That darkness it feels so oppressive, and it feels so endless that it looks like there's no light at the end of the tunnel. It looks like there's nothing left, but it's totally wrong. If you keep walking, there is in fact light, and you will in fact get out. And depression lies to you. Depression is a bastard. It lies to you constantly, but it is just a lie. If you keep on going, you will make it out. And the only thing constant in life is change. And if you keep on going, it will change. And that's what I would tell myself. That's what I tell my own kids.
And we actually had a really good last question is, should we, you know, so for the community, maybe your recommendation or perspective, should we be investing more in peer support groups as opposed to focusing on adults and, you know, like training the adults? Yes. Maybe the focus should be on peer groups.
1,000% yes. I have spoken to the FBI directly about that and told them that you can put up all the bars on the doors, you can restrict all the entryways, you can put up all the metal detectors you want, you can put all the physical barriers in the school. You can get the same effect with one pizza party and actually listening to the kid. Like, actually engage with the kids as people and actually listen to them and remember that you were there once too. The more you can do that, the more you'll become the trusted source, both for the pain and for the good. You'll be the source for their smiles and for their tears. And you'll be the one that they go to when they feel that they need to release either one of those. And that is the key. That's the spot to be, is to be the spot that tells them that they matter and they can be. Be the one that they cry to, be the one that they yell at, and be the one that they smile with afterwards.
Great stuff. Thanks, Michelle, for mentioning those. I think you've touched on just about everything that somebody commented on through your general answers and the discussions we've had since the questions have been coming.
I just want to thank everybody for giving me this chance today. It was a really big honor to speak with you guys. I really appreciate it. If anybody wants to connect with me or contact me, you can. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook.
And while you're doing that, I mean, obviously there's everybody saying thank you in the chats, and that almost feels like saying thank you isn't quite right, hitting the mark on to sort of show appreciation for what you've shared with us. And it's been such a valuable perspective that I don't think a lot of people even considered, surprisingly, but it makes so much sense now. So from our side, to educate us, we really appreciate the time you've taken. And as we could see, it's an emotional thing to have to go through this over and over, and that must be something I hope that you're able to deal with that also afterwards, having to sort of go through all of these experiences. But really, thank you so much.
To me, it feels like I'm finally making, if I can use my story to help people either find a way out of that darkness or help people out of that darkness, then maybe I've made it all worth it.
Mm.
So to me,
Well, I
I
think
look at it
definitely.
like I won. That it's, yeah, I cry every time, but those are tears that need to happen. So
Fantastic. And this has been amazing. So thank you so much.
thank you guys. Thanks again for having me. It's really been a pleasure.
Great stuff. Thank you.